Propaganda is everywhere. On billboards, when we walk on the city streets, when you watch commercials on TV. Even here on YouTube, when you see ads if you don't have a premium subscription. Propaganda is even in movies, TV series, video games, even in the food that you eat. Throughout centuries, people tried to perfect this forbidden art of propaganda. But none other perfected it and had such grand results like Joseph Goebbels. Edward Bernays. This man is responsible for the rampant consumerism that the Western world is struggling with at this point in time. He is responsible for mass obesity in USA, the loss of meaning of life in this post-ideological world that we live in. Responsible for the corporatist dystopia that we live in today and the inevitable downfall of Western civilization, in which he played a very important role. You might ask yourself, who is this guy? What he did so important that he indirectly caused the downfall of Western civilization? I'm glad you asked. Hit it, Johnny! Edward Bernays first started his propagandist career by being a journalist and a critic for theater plays. He only focused on controversial and sexually themed plays, describing some of them as propaganda that fought for sex education. On one occasion, using a sexually suggestive photo of the star of the play to tap in to the primal brain of man. Yes, gun your brains out, Goem. These public stunts caught the eye of the Committee of Public Information, CPI if you will, to help them with the recruitment effort when USA joined World War I in 1917. Seeing that no one wanted to fight a war 5,000 miles away, Edward Bernays, as he himself described in his book that he would later publish in the 20s, what he did was psychological warfare to bolster the spirits of the populace and drive them into the direction of patriotism and to make them join the US Army. After the end of World War I, the CPI was dismantled because the word propaganda began having a bad connotation with dehumanizing the enemy and brainwashing. Well, they're not wrong. Later in the 20s, Bernays realized that propaganda can also be used during peacetime. He thought that psychological warfare can be used for good and for the benefit of the organizations and corporations to sell a specific product. What a scumbag of a human being! And later, the US government founded the Public Relations Committee because naming it the Ministry of Propaganda was too much on the nose, if you catch my drift. Bernays was later hired by Beech Nut Packing Factory to help them with sales in bacon. At that time, a light breakfast was considered healthy and most Americans ate a lighter breakfast. But Bernays asked the opinion, and also bribed, some medical professionals to recommend a more hearty breakfast, describing it as healthier. Appeal to authority. Great propaganda tool. And so the classic American bacon and eggs breakfast was born. And with each decade, Americans became more and more obese. Later, at the end of the Roaring 20s, he was hired by Lucky Strike. They saw that they had almost no sales between the women demographic. Lucky Strike, seeing that it's too expensive to change the color of the packaging of the cigarettes, Bernays convinced some fashion designers to implement the color green into their clothes. The fashion industry was heavily leveraging the first wave feminist movement to sell their products. Bernays contacted his psychoanalyst friend Abraham Brill. This guy told him that cigarettes are viewed as torches of freedom in the feminist movement. And so this created the perfect storm on 1st of April 1929. a women's rights march was happening in New York City. He contacted a group of female friends to march in the New York City East Day Parade, smoking Lucky Strike in the public and posing for the press. This bold publicity stunt was a massive hit and made colossal sales for Lucky Strike. Ah yes, appeal to herd mentality works every time in propaganda. Later, he was hired by the then President of the United States, Calvin Coolidge, to help him appeal more to the public, making him cooler. What was the idea Bernays came up with? Gather a bunch of celebrities to have breakfast with the president, making him cooler. Fast forward to the early 40s, Bernays was hired by the United Fruit Company, a multinational corporation of Latin America, making propaganda and linking bananas as a healthy choice for a quick snack. Later that year, Guatemala had a coup d'etat, toppling the Guatemalan government, putting a democratically elected president in charge. Allegedly. The United Fruit Company saw that their profit plummeted when workers began to be given rights and fair wages. Give fair wages and rights to workers? What a controversial thing to do! Bernays asked the Public Relations Ministry of USA to portray the Guatemalan leader as a communist, when in reality he was just a regular liberal. And Bernays portrayed the United Fruit Company as a victim of communist menace. This leading to a CIA-led coup d'etat in 1954, where the democratically elected Guatemalan leader was toppled to implement a government to suit the United Fruit Company and USA's interests. Ah yes, CIA, toppling governments for mega corporations and USA's interests since 1947. Now, let's delve deeper into his famous book entitled, very fittingly, Propaganda. You see, before the 20th century, propaganda was crude and relied on the principle of Pavlovian conditioning, basically repeating the same lie over and over again to make people do what you want them to do. That was not very effective. Bernays came with a more subtle and smart approach by tapping into the deep desires of people, appealing to their emotions, to their herd mentality, appealing to their guilt and their primal brain. Funny fact, Edward Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalytics, aka the father of pseudoscience bullshit, because his philosophy was debunked and disproved by Carl Jung and many other philosophers way smarter than him, and also by people with common sense. Edward Bernays stated in his book that the general population is neurotic and irrational and they need to be subverted, and the use of propaganda is necessary and advertisement is needed to herd the population and the public opinion and public consumption into the direction the government and the higher organizations need them to go, to enact change in society and to enact a clear direction where they need to be directed to. You see what they think about you? Yes, you, the pleb watching my video. They see you as cattle, as an animal to be exploited for their grand idea on how civilization should function according to their sick ideas. Propaganda, in order to be effective, it needs to be simplistic and have simple affirmations that appeal to emotion. Those affirmations need to be repeated everywhere in order to drive forward the idea you want the population to assimilate into their subconscious mind, and that idea needs to be heard and understood by all, and you need to dump it down for everyone to understand. Bernays also understood that the group mentality and how an individual is conditioned by the group he is a member of. He says that humans are gregarious and feel that they are part of a herd even when they are alone with the curtain drawn. Their mind retains patterns which have been stamped on their mind by the group influences. I hate to say it, but I kinda agree with him. Bernays saw that his propaganda, and propaganda in general, can be very dangerous, and says that it has the same relation to education as it has for on business and social services. Some may use it as advertisement for various institutions or for nefarious reasons like creating artificial values in society. Sound familiar? Edward Bernays said, and I quote, "Only through the active energy of the few can the public at large become aware and act upon new ideas." So basically, he saw you as cattle. What a fucking arrogant, self-important, narcissistic, diabolical piece of shit this man was. And you know what's even crazier? The fact that I agree with almost everything he said. Am I a piece of shit? Otto, tell me, am I a piece of shit? Silence can also be an answer. Although I agree with almost everything he said in his book entitled, very fittingly, Propaganda, a book that I encourage each and every one of you to read, not because he was some sort of genius or a self-proclaimed master of propaganda, but because you need to know how they think about you, and you need to know what tactics they use against you. I agree with Edward Bernays that propaganda can be used for a benevolent purpose, but you see, Bernays' idea of good and benevolence is diabolical and downright evil. The fact that Bernays was, to some extent, responsible for the massive societal degeneracy that we see today more and more, he is responsible for the rampant consumerism that the global civilization suffers from now, responsible for rampant obesity in the USA, for billions of women destroying their lungs by smoking, responsible for millions of young idiots that joined the army fighting and dying for a war they had no business being part of. Shows you that the business of public relations, and it shows you that Edward Bernays was one of the most destructive and infamous men to ever live. But Edward Bernays, on the date of March 9th, 1995, he did the most altruistic thing he ever did in his entire life. He died. And at the age of 103 years old, might I add. Man, what's up with evil people living long lives? I mean, Henry Kissinger, Edward Bernays, George Soros, Betty White. Well, I guess like the Iron Maiden song said, only the good die young, and all the evil seems to live forever. And you know what's even funnier? The fact that this guy is not popular at all. Most people don't even know who this guy was. A guy that worked behind the curtain to influence and destroy civilization while benefiting from it and making corporations even richer. Hang on a moment. Bernays. This name sounds kind of fishy to me. Hang on a moment. Let me check his early life. Oh. Well, that explains a lot. Also, let me check the early life of his psychoanalyst deranged uncle Sigmund Freud, just to be sure. Early life Sigmund Freud. Oh. Yep, that explains a lot. Side note, I knew all along. I just wanted this skit to be funnier. So quirky of me. This shows you that people who work behind the curtain are often more destructive and diabolical than the ones we see in public. Politicians? Only puppets. PR managers, advertisers, bankers, those are the real bad guys. Politicians are only clowns putting on a show for the stupid masses. But you see, most people that do this kind of stuff are psychotic and downright diabolical, and they are not bound by any morality or law. And this is why people need to fight back with the same weapons they fight with. And you see, I actually agree with Edward Bernays that propaganda can be used for benevolent reasons. But the question is, who's gonna do it? I mean, I personally do propaganda right here on this channel. I admit it. But you see, the type of propaganda that I do is promoting silly and outdated things like family values, heritage, nationalism, religion, and God. But you see, I would rather die a fool than not be true to myself. Don't let those bureaucrats, those corporatists, those PR managers, or those advertisers to create this ugly, dystopic culture that we live in today. You, the guy or gal that watched my video up until now, you are the culture.